Hey everybody, Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best ways to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed in all major podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, and more. Within minutes of finishing your recording, podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Follow the link in the show notes. Let Buzzsprout know we sent you, and you can get a $20 Amazon gift card. And who doesn't want one of those right now if you sign up for a paid plan, and it'll help support our show. Welcome to Before the Lights podcast. I'm Tommy Canale. This is the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment have made their mark. Please go to our website, beforethelightspod.com, for all episodes and even much more. Follow us on Instagram at Before the Lights Pod. Have a couple minutes, head over to Apple Podcasts. I'd kindly appreciate a rate and a review. But right now, time to get this one started. Go get yourself a coffee or grab a drink. Tell your family, friends, neighbors, and yes, tell strangers. It's time to have an in-depth conversation with our guests. Today, we have a corporate keynote speaker from many organizations like American Express, Starbucks. He also is with Penn State football, the author of the book, Raise Your Game. He is a performance expert, business owner, podcaster, and entrepreneur. Please welcome Alan Stein Jr. to the show. Alan, how are you?
I'm fantastic, Tommy. It's great to connect with you, my friend.
Yes. And everybody, I'm going to throw it out there right now. Write it down, and we're going to say this 100 times, but go to alansteinjr.com, and you can find all kinds of information on Alan. Alan, I want to start here with you, and eventually we're going to rewind a little bit. But one of the things I think we should throw out right away, and I love some of the things that you put out there, and this is one of them, is that you teach proven strategies to improve organizational performance. If you would kind of elaborate on that, on what these proven strategies are and how they're put into place.
Sure. I'm incredibly thankful that I've been a part of a team or sometimes multiple teams for my entire life. And the good portion of those were through sport. So I have a very strong appreciation for the concept of teamwork, team cohesion, and building incredible cultures. And I found that the principles and strategies required to do that in sport have very high utility, and those exact same principles and strategies apply in business. And without getting too granular, there are things like role clarity, making sure that every single person on the team knows their role, embraces their role, but most importantly, does everything in their power to star in their role. And that's one of the hardest parts about being in an organization is when you have to accept a role and embrace a role that's not the role that you necessarily want, but it is the role that the team needs you to have for the team to be successful. And in order for any organization to be successful, you need to have a group of people that are selfless and willing to put the we over me when it comes to just daily performance and daily habits and so forth. And, if you look at a basketball analogy, it's easy to convince someone of the role to be the starting point guard. You get to play a lot of minutes, but it's much harder to convince someone to play a lesser role, say the backup point guard, and to convince them that, look, you're probably not going to play very many minutes, but we need you to come to every practice and every workout and every film session and push the starting point guard so that he can become the best he's capable of, because that gives us the best chance to win. And you could do the same thing in a corporate environment. Usually the folks at the higher end of the org chart, that's an easier sell. That usually comes with a more pristine title, with more compensation, with better benefits, as opposed to being on the lower end of the org chart. Yet the folks on the lower end are just as important to the fabric of that organization. Additionally, because I don't know how much depth you'd like, things like accountability, putting in practices that make sure everyone holds everyone else accountable, not just vertically on the org chart, but also horizontally. And then, of course, communication. Communication might be the most important component for any organization to fulfill its potential and be able to fulfill its mission and its purpose.
Yeah, and the reason I want to start out there, just when we get to your background, it'll make sense for the listeners that may not know your background. And this is all going to come together. And it's like the wheels, but as a former junior college basketball coach, I've always referred role playing to baking chocolate chip cookies. You can make chocolate chip cookies and everybody loves them, but miss one ingredient and all of a sudden that chocolate chip cookie doesn't taste as good. And if you forget a key ingredient, then nobody wants to bite into the chocolate chip cookie. So I kind of use that analogy with your role playing of going, I need everybody on the same boat so our chocolate chip cookie is the best out there. And it kind of helps understand where, hey, I may, like you said, be the backup point guard. I'm important to making sure that this cookie is as best as it can be.
Absolutely. I love that. And, and with that analogy, which is actually making me hungry, the chocolate chips are probably the sexiest and most glamorous of the ingredients, where maybe say baking soda isn't. But right. As you just mentioned, if you don't have the baking soda, then you're not going to have a cookie. What I've always said is, and just a slightly different analogy, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Mm-hmm. Every puzzle piece matters. Yes, some puzzle pieces are bigger and more colorful and so forth, but you need every piece to finish the final picture. And if you're missing even the smallest of pieces, then that final mosaic is going to be incomplete. And that's how a team needs to view it. It needs to function. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that everyone on the team has a very strong appreciation and respect for everyone else's role. So if you are the starting point guard, you need to make sure that you're showing love and appreciation to the 15th man. If you are the chocolate chip, then you need to be showing love to the baking soda, because you have to know that without them, you aren't able to do your job or fulfill your role to a maximum ability. So the best teams I've ever been around, that happens often. The best player on the team is constantly putting their arm around and encouraging the 15th man. And of course, when you're talking about a really high performing team, like a team in the NBA, that 15th man is still incredibly elite. Mm-hmm. I mean, you better believe that the 15th man on the bench of any NBA team is still one of the top 400 players in the world at their craft. So this is also not about saying that just because someone has a lesser role, that it means that they're not good at what they do or that they're not valuable. And I think you could make the same argument at a variety of high performing companies. I mean, the 10th person in charge at Google could probably be in charge of just about any other company in the country. So it just makes sure that we're constantly showing that respect and appreciation and letting your teammates know, hey, I value you and I value the role that you play in our team.
Alan is very well spoken, understands a great deal of stuff. That's why he's a corporate keynote speaker. But before those lights kick, we're going to go back. You dabbled in being a BMX and skateboarding and eventually chose basketball. Why did basketball become the one you gravitated to?
As you just alluded to, I was incredibly active as a kid, and I was drawn to anything that could expel physical energy. I did all of the conventional sports, but like you said, even tried my hat at BMX biking and skateboarding and martial arts. But for some reason, I always gravitated back to basketball. And I think it was for two reasons. Interesting enough, at the time of this recording, where ESPN is playing the docuseries about the Bulls and Michael Jordan, a 10-part docuseries, I do think Michael Jordan had a hand in why I chose basketball, because I'm 44 years old. So as I'm coming up as a youth and in my early teens, this is when Michael Jordan became Michael Jordan, the global sensation. And I don't know anybody that was in my age bracket that wasn't drawn to that and that didn't want to emulate him, or, as they always said in those Gatorade commercials, be like Mike. So, yeah. I mean, he turned basketball, into something that we had never seen before. That was certainly part of it. But the other part that I always loved about the game was there was an individual component, whereas I could work in my driveway by myself with just a hoop and a ball, and I could work on at least two of the major skill sets, which were ball handling and shooting. They happen to be the two sexiest skill sets, of course. I wasn't doing very many defensive slides in my driveway, but, I could actually work on my game during any hours of the day to make myself better. And I kind of like that individuality and self-reliance. But then I love the fact that I could go to practice or go play pickup, and then I could use what I had done to improve my game to try to make other people better and to try to be a puzzle piece with the other 4 players to see if we could win. So I think it was this cool combination between the individual component and the team component and the dance they had back and forth that I loved. And, there's also just something about basketball that's graceful. It combines every aspect of athleticism. If you're only one of 5 players on the court, you have a higher probability of touching the ball than, say, with a sport like football or a sport like baseball. If you're out in right field, depending on the age you are, you could go an entire game and the ball never gets hit to you, not even one time. Or if you're an offensive lineman, you're never even going to touch the ball the entire game. So if those things were important to you, those sports kind of excluded you, for those reasons. Whereas basketball, not saying every player touches it the exact same amount, but you're kind of involved in the action on every possession. So I think for all of those reasons, basketball was and continues to be my favorite.
You ended up going to Elon, which at the time was Division II, got a sports management degree there. But tell me, what was your basketball career like at the collegiate level? Were you one of the starters? Did you have aspirations to go, hey, maybe I'll go overseas? Or are you one of those guys that go, I'm going pro too?
No, the writing was on the wall. By the time I hit high school, I was pretty confident I was not going to be a pro player. And I say that with a smile. When I was little, if you're the best kid in your neighborhood, then when you're that age, you think you'll play in the NBA. And, then you get to the high school and right when I'm in high school, in the early 90s, that's kind of when AAU started to really explode. And you weren't just competing with players in your city and state, but now you could compete with players all over the world. And I could see at that point that basketball was much bigger than my small town in the suburbs. So I knew I wasn't going to be a pro. And also keep in mind, too, that, there are so many more pro opportunities to play today than there were, 30 years ago. I mean, players now that will graduate from Elon have a great chance of playing professionally, maybe not in the NBA, but absolutely overseas. I mean, that's the level that the game has risen to. So, for me, I could see that my playing days were limited. And I was a pretty good public school player, in the DC area in high school, and didn't have a very good college career. And most of that was my own doing. I can look back and with grace and compassion, give myself a little leniency, but I didn't have a very good attitude when I was in college. I actually started most of the season as a freshman, and I think I just assumed that was going to be my position for the next 3 years. And the following year, when I didn't put in very much work in the offseason and somebody deserved to start ahead of me, I had a very bad attitude about that. And I did things then that I preach heavily for folks not to do today. So I learned my lesson.
Yeah, lessons learned.
I'm glad that I went through that journey. But I would blame other people, specifically the coach. I would make excuses on why I wasn't starting. And then I would just spend more time complaining than I did working. And that's not a recipe for being successful. So, I didn't have a great college career, although I learned tons of life lessons that still serve me today. So I'm thankful for every part of my journey. But when I did graduate, I knew that I wanted to stay involved in the game of basketball. And since I couldn't do it as a player, that's when I knew that coaching was the right move for me.
Who are some of your early mentors?
One of the earliest was a guy named John Philbin, who at the time was an assistant strength coach for the Washington Redskins, and he owned a local gym here. And I trained with him as I was finishing high school to prepare for college, and then I trained with him when I was coming home from college. And that was really when I started to fall in love with the performance side of coaching. So that was when I realized I don't necessarily want to be a basketball coach, but I'd like to be a basketball strength and conditioning coach. I mean, what he was able to help me do to improve my vertical jump and my athleticism and put on weight, I just thought was one of the coolest things. And I thought having a job like his would be awesome. Except, his main love was football, and I just wanted to kind of be like him, but in basketball. And so he was incredibly influential. And, you and I could spend a 4-hour podcast of me naming everyone that's that's mentored me and had a hand in my ability to do the things that I've been able to do. So I'm incredibly grateful for all of those folks.
You end up 15 years as a peak performance coach. And when you first got into that, did you have any early obstacles that maybe you didn't anticipate? You thought maybe this might go a little bit smoother than it did, or did you just kind of hit the pavement running, so to speak, with it?
No, I mean, the main obstacle took years and years to overcome. And that was the obstacle that most basketball players and coaches didn't think strength and conditioning was necessary. Or many of them didn't even think it was a good thing to do. You know, football had bought in hook, line, and sinker decades before, and football and lifting weights were always very synonymous. But basketball was very different. You know, players just wanted to play. You know, they had no interest in being in the weight room. They had no interest in getting stronger. So it took a while for me to help persuade coaches and players that this would benefit players tremendously. And here's why. And, you know, once again, going back to Michael Jordan, you know, he was the one that kind of set the foundation, because he was one of the first major pro basketball players to really embrace strength training and getting stronger and the physicality. And that was, without, you know, a spoiler alert, that's what was covered in the last episode of the docuseries, The Last Dance. Was he knew that in order for them to beat the Pistons, he had to get physically stronger and put on weight. And he spent an entire offseason putting on, you know, I think it was like 15 to 20 pounds. And that coincided with him being able to beat the Pistons. He was able to stay healthy and not get injured and take a beating and bulletproof his body. So it started with Jordan. And then, of course, over time, most players would follow what Michael Jordan did, because, you know, he was the GOAT. And you fast forward to today, where all of the big name players, LeBron and KD and Steph Curry, I mean, all of those guys are on a year-round strength and conditioning program. They take their strength and conditioning very serious. They take their bodies very serious. So it just took a while for me to be able to convince coaches and players that this was not a nice to have. This was a necessity for them to stay healthy and to maximize performance on the court.
From 2000 to 2007, you were the co-owner, strength and conditioning coach with Elite Training Systems. And then I think you started traveling with the Nike coaches basketball circuit. And I seen you present a couple times. I actually still have the hard copy of the SAQ, speed, agility, quickness stuff that I used all the time and still give to some of the coaches around here, because that's fantastic stuff. When I tell them, when I look at a basketball court after hearing you present, going, you know, I can get you guys in shape with just this court. And I could use a ball, but I really don't need to, based on all the stuff that you did. When you started getting hooked up with Nike, did you start seeing the change, or did the change come once you got hooked up with DeMatha Catholic School and Montrose? Did they both kind of collide together then?
Everything kind of, came to a head almost as if a perfect storm. It was a little bit of all of those things. I believe that one of the things that helped make my perspective unique at the time, at least in the youth area, was the fact that I was a former basketball player. You know, I walked, talked, and thought like a basketball player, but now I was learning all of, you know, movement and physiology and body mechanics and footwork. So I was learning the training side, and then could draw on my basketball side and could marry those two together so that the program felt very basketball specific, which was most important to players. You know, most of the biggest turnoff for a basketball player was, I don't want to train like a football player. I don't want to be big and bulky and muscle bound. And so the perception of it being incredibly basketball specific was very, very helpful. And then, like anything else, you know, if I'm able to work at a school like Montrose and DeMatha, which produced several NBA players, then other coaches took notice and said, well, if these two prominent programs are doing strength and conditioning, well, then maybe we should be doing it too. And that's not necessarily a testament to my ability as a coach. It's more of the proof that those two programs and coaches were so established that people wanted to follow what they did. People just made the inference that if DeMatha and Montrose were doing it, then we should be doing it too, because they were elite programs. So once I got on board with them and then opened up doors at Nike and Jordan Brand, that's when everything really exploded, because people started to take notice. And again, forever thankful for those opportunities. What's interesting was, you know, so few people were doing basketball specific training at the youth and high school level. it wasn't a very crowded or competitive space back then. I mean, I basically reached out to Nike and said, hey, this is why you should have a performance coach at your camps. They didn't even think of having one. And, so I was able to talk my way in. Whereas today, my guess would be that'd be a pretty long line to get in if you wanted to work an event for Nike. So some of it just happened to be I got in at the right time with some ideas that other people weren't doing with that specific niche. And it all just kind of came together.
And I always say, no matter what the success story somebody has, there's a break in there somewhere where you were right place, right time. For you, it was right timing when you started to get there because nobody was really doing this yet. You kind of had the vision ahead of everybody else of where it was at. And then it continued to take off. But it continued to grow for you, Alan, because eventually you started getting into with some big name players in the NBA like Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and Kobe. Did all that come from just growing the brand and proving yourself time and time again? And then how did that break go to going from, okay, I'm here with these 2 elite high school programs. Now I have some college guys that are looking on board. And now all of a sudden I got NBA guys asking for some advice and help. How did that all translate for you?
Once again, it was kind of just right place, right time, and the continuation of, kind of being in before everybody else was in. And now these types of things allow you to get in the door, but in order to stay in there, you have to be good at what you do. So, opportunities may arise, but you have to in order to stay, then you have to be competent at what you do. The fact that both Montrose and DeMatha were Nike elite programs. I mean, they were one of, at the time, a dozen high schools that Nike treated almost as if they were a college level program with the gear and so forth that they took care of them with. So that alone is what helps earn credibility with Nike. And then Nike said, hey, we've got these summer skills academies that are built around our best NBA players. Why don't you come work these? And that's what led to being able to observe some workouts and do some work with some of those guys. And once again, it was just kind of this continuous progression. And, I'm such a lifelong learner, and I was so committed to my craft, then I was getting better as well. As each year goes on, I'm becoming a more competent and a more qualified performance coach. I mean, the growth that I would have experienced between 2000 and 2010, was immense. So I was making sure that I was raising my game at the same pace and level that the players I was working with were raising theirs on the court. So, again, I can't stress enough how right place and right time does play a role. But that's just the impetus to getting everything started.
When did the idea come, or did somebody come to you about going from training players to actually training the coaches to train the players? Because somewhere in there, all of a sudden the coaches wanted to get on board. I think they saw the movement as well going, wait a minute, I need to be doing this. So did somebody approach you, or did you see again ahead of everybody else going, if I can train the players, maybe I can train the coaches and they can train the players?
Most of that, it came twofold. One, on some level, when you're just in the gym 8 hours a day, just working 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 with players, like there is something very unique and special about that. And I did enjoy that. But part of me started to get burnt out on that and thought, I don't want to just be in the weight room 8 hours a day for the rest of my life. What are some other things that I can be doing? But even more important to that was I was trying to figure out what was my main purpose. Like what was my why for doing what I was doing? And I whittled it down to, I kind of wanted to leave my thumbprint on youth basketball. And when I say youth, I'm also talking about high school. But I wanted the youth and high school game, to be a little bit better after I could make some contributions to it. And I started to figure out, well, the only way that I could do that is to be able to scale my message and affect more players. Keep in mind, too, that the vast majority of this was done before social media and before we were all interconnected. So when you're looking at, 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, before those things really started to take off, it was like, okay, let me just look at the sheer math. I can train 8 players a day, 1-on-1, and that's affecting 8 human beings. And I'm not discrediting that. That's still a good deal. Or I could go train a team and potentially affect 15 players in one day, potentially in 1 hour. Or I could hold a large workout where, 50 to 60 players attended, kind of a clinic style, and I could affect 50 to 60 players. But then it was when I realized, or if I want to really look at multiples before social media, if I could go speak to 100 coaches and those 100 coaches found value in what I had to say, and they went back and each shared it with their 15 players, well, now I'm actually affecting 1,500 players in one shot. And that's when I realized, okay, now I'm onto something. For me to be the most valuable to having a positive impact on the game and really changing the way people were training, it was going to the coaches. And then when you figure, the average high school coach, well, they share that with the boys and girls teams and the varsity and the JV teams. Well, many high school basketball programs, that's roughly 60 players, girls and boys JV, girls and boys varsity. So now it's like, man, if I could just get my information into one high school, that would be 60 players that potentially could be affected. So now I can go speak at a Nike clinic where they're telling me there'll be 500 or 600 high school coaches in attendance, and each of those could affect 60 players when they go back. My math's not good enough to do that on the spot, but you're talking about multiple thousand players could potentially hear my message. And right as I started to get in a groove, that's when we started to see Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. And then I was like, okay, the game is on now, because not only could I affect thousands of people at the clinic in person, but if we film this and we put this out on social media, now who knows how many tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands could see it. So for me, it was more of the trying to stick to my altruistic mission and purpose of having a positive effect on the game and what was going to be the best way to do that. And that's really what led me to coach the coaches.
It brings me back to another thought. I interviewed recently a gentleman by the name of Chef Vic Vegas out here, runner-up Food Network star, but he said an analogy that has stuck with me. And he said, when I got to the roof of where I was and I couldn't learn anymore, I took that and made that my ground at my next position to continue to evolve and continue to grow my craft. And that supersedes pretty much a lot of analogies I've heard, and it can go across any spectrum, basically, of anything you're doing out there. When you hit that ceiling, you got to make that your ground and continue to grow. And you were able to continue to see that and go over and over. And then after about 15 years of being a peak performance coach in 2017, you decide to get into Raise Your Game and being a speaker and a consultant and an author. Where did that idea come for you? I know you're already speaking, but did you decide I want to take this to even a bigger platform and get into the business side of it and use what I know from basketball and go, hey, I can translate this into business?
Yeah, that was definitely a huge part of it. I mean, part of it was then, as I said, that my passion and interest for actually being in the gym with players started to wane a little bit. So I decided to start, traveling to speak to coaches. My interest in athleticism and programming and exercises and sets and reps, I wasn't near as fascinated with that as much as I was things like leadership, building teams and cohesion and culture, accountability, improving communication. That was the stuff that was really lighting my fire. And I figured if I was going to make a jump from focusing more of my performance coaching, instead of being on the court, but focusing more of it off the court, I just decided to make a huge pivot and redirect to a new audience, which I'll just call the corporate world. I still speak to tons of coaches and players, so it's not like I left the game of basketball, but I definitely wanted to broaden my reach because I realized that the things that I had learned through the game of basketball had such high utility that they would work in other areas of life. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to just keep these things that I had learned from some amazing coaches and players. I didn't want to stay confined to the four walls of the gym. I wanted to be able to share that with anyone and everyone that I thought it could benefit. And, for years prior, I had always had kind of this bucket list item of being a professional speaker. I was speaking in the basketball world, but the vast majority of what I was doing was demonstrating exercises and teaching them how to build programs, strength and conditioning programs. So I wasn't really doing the type of speaking that I'm doing now. So I was just ready to make a leap and take on a new challenge. And part of it also had to do kind of with the wear and tear on my body. I'm 44 now. So when I made this leap, I was right around 40 years old, which I think is kind of a pivotal time in a lot of people's lives. That midlife crisis where you start looking around and going, okay, I'm basically on the back nine. I've got a second half that I got to pay attention to. And, sometimes I was on the court running workouts for 4 or 5 or 6 hours in a row. And it was very physically grueling. And I was like, I don't know that I'll be able to do this when I'm 70. So let me start to make some pivots. Whereas now I can easily keynote speak into my 70s because it's less physically demanding. So once again, it was kind of the perfect storm. And I saw an opportunity to reinvent myself, to serve a new audience and to spread my wings and take on a new challenge.
When you first got into being a professional speaker and something you had on your bucket list, what obstacles did you hit right away that maybe you weren't anticipating?
Well, no, I actually was anticipating them, thankfully.
Okay.
And it was the same, very similar to what I faced when I got into the basketball performance space, where I'm trying to convince players and coaches that strength and conditioning is a good thing. Now, when I got in, I had to be able to explain to people why someone who had never had a corporate job in his entire life had something of value to offer the corporate world. So, I basically needed to be able to convince people that, yeah, I know that I've been working with high school athletes for the last 20 years, but trust me, I've got some things that will help your Fortune 500 company improve. So it was about establishing that credibility, being able to, prove to them that these strategies that work for creating culture at an elite high school level are the same principles that'll apply here at the corporate level. And I actually enjoyed that challenge. I liked that. And I chose to flip it around and say, right now you're looking at my lack of corporate experience as a negative. It's actually a positive because I'm going to come in with a fresh perspective. I'm going to come in and share things with you that you've never even thought of before, because I believe the most unacceptable answer you can give to any question is, well, that's just the way it's always been done, or that's the way we've always done it. And I said, I promise you, because I'm so naive on the corporate side, I won't come in and say that. I'm going to come in and say, wait, what do you mean this is how you hold your meetings? Have you ever thought about doing them this way? Or what do you mean this is how you hold each other accountable? Have you ever looked at doing it this way? And that freshness and newness, I thought they would find attractive. And thankfully, that bet paid off because many groups do embrace this philosophy.
Do you remember which corporation was the first one to give you your break?
Well, I know. So if you want to, the way that I approached this was, as soon as I decided to make the leap, the very first thing I did was I reached out to about a dozen friends and colleagues that were currently working in the corporate space and said, look, you know me, you know what's in my wheelhouse and what I've done. What things do you believe that I could offer the most value to your corporations right now? And they would start to share with me, well, we have trouble with this, or we have trouble with that, or this is a pain point or a challenge for us. And I did my due diligence and I collected a ton of information. And then I whittled it down and said, okay, these things are in my wheelhouse. I could go to these companies right now and share these stories and these lessons and these stats, and they would find it valuable. So I didn't guess what they would find valuable. I asked what they would find valuable, and they told me. Then to work on the actual craft, I reached out to several of them again and said, look, I'd love to come talk to your company. You don't have to pay me. I'm willing to do this for free because I need to get in the reps of speaking. I'm not going to come in there and wing it. I'm going to come in there and treat this as if it's a professionally paid engagement. But if you just give me an opportunity, I can really start to cut my teeth and see how this will transpire. And, in their mind, they're thinking, okay, we know Alan, we know he's going to share some quality stuff. We don't have to pay anything. What do we have to lose? And I took them up on that and probably did 10 to 15 free gigs right out of the gate and learned plenty of lessons then. I filmed all of those sessions and I went back and watched the film to see what things I thought I did well and what things certainly needed some improvement. And I really started to sharpen my sword. And then at that point, after spending a couple months doing due diligence and a couple of months actually getting in reps and practicing, then I said, okay, I'm ready to hang a shingle and start charging people for this. And that's when some of the paid engagements started coming in. And it's like anything else. Speaking very much is a word of mouth business. So thankfully, the 10 to 15 groups that I gave free talks to, they were pleased. and reached out to their colleagues and said, hey, we had a guy come in, you should consider bringing him in too. And they just kept, our little secret that I did it for free. And then now they're referring me some paid business. So I took a very strategic and systematic and methodical approach, but I'm glad that I did it that way because it really gave me a nice foundation moving forward.
One of the things you brought up that I kind of want to backtrack you on is you talked about all the research you did and asking what they were needing, and you came in prepared. And speaking of preparation, bringing it up to today, how much preparation do you do before each one of your corporate speeches?
I do a ton. I don't know. I've got a friend and mentor named Kevin Eastman, and I don't know if he actually coined the phrase "make your preparation your separation." I love I love language, and I love things that rhyme and have a rhythm. So I really like that. And another mentor of mine, Jay Billis from ESPN, is one of the most prepared people I've ever met. Before he calls any game for ESPN, he has done so much due diligence. Back when I had a podcast, I had an opportunity to interview Mark Cuban. And one of the things Mark Cuban says was he attributes his success to the fact that he is always the most prepared person in any room. He might not be the smartest. He might not be the best looking. He might not be the funniest, but he will be the most prepared person in any room that he enters because that's something he has control over. And kind of a culmination of three people there that I really look up to and admire talked about how important preparation was. So that's always been a major point of emphasis for me. And to this day, I still have the exact same approach. If you had a company of 100 salespeople and you said you're going to bring me to Las Vegas to speak to them, we would have a pre-event call and I would be asking you a series of questions to help prepare myself to customize the talk so it's a great fit for you. And many of those questions would be along the lines of, Tommy, what are some of your biggest pain points and challenges? What are some of the behaviors that you need to see changed? What's at risk if these things don't change? Along those lines, though, things that your team does really well that you want me to continue to reinforce and emphasize. What is it that you want your people to do differently after I leave? And really get a feel so that when I leave and I'm done that speaking engagement, your people think, man, Alan really gets us. He understands us. He took the time to ask questions and observe and sit in on sessions or, read through materials and study our website and maybe even do some secret shopper calls. Like he did everything he could to learn everything he could about us. And to me, that's the best compliment I can get after a speaking engagement was, man, I really felt like you were talking specifically to us. And that only comes from preparation.
Moving on, you have a book called Raise Your Game. It's high performance secrets from the best of the best. The idea for the book, where'd that come from? How long was that from idea to print?
Well, the idea came from once I graduated college, I was a voracious reader. My first year out of college, I set a goal of reading 50 books in one calendar year. So basically a book a week. And that was pretty aggressive because even back then, while some people had some books on tape, we didn't really have Audible to the degree that we have it now. So I was physically reading books and I was just devouring them. And I just have so much respect for authors. I have so much respect for books in general that I thought, man, if I could add to my legacy writing something that other people find useful and helpful, that would just be a really cool thing. That would be a nice feather in my cap and give me a nice sense of fulfillment. And once again, all I'm doing is paying forward all of the lessons that other people have taught me. And it was just I just decided to kind of curate them and organize them and put them in a book to pay it forward and share with others. So that was, it was also, in addition to speaking, was a professional bucket list item to say, hey, I want to be an author one day. But the other reason was going back to doing this due diligence for speaking, organizing the book, which is basically the same philosophy on what I speak about, forced me to get great clarity on my message, forced me to get hyper organized with all of my content. One of the things looking back, when I look at my first few speaking engagements, I think I had the raw materials to be pretty good at speaking, but my content, it was just more of a collage of stories. There was nothing sequential or progressive. There weren't, lessons weren't directly linked to stories. It was just kind of almost as if you and I went to grab a beer and I was just going to share with you a bunch of things I had learned in training. it just wasn't an organized fit. And writing the book helped with that tremendously. I still say to this day that had I not even published the book, if that thing was still sitting on my computer, the act of writing it and putting it together was so valuable towards my speaking career and my ability to deliver an impactful message. So those were the main reasons for writing it. And the last, which kind of was a third, was we mentioned that I didn't have any credibility in the corporate space at the time. And I knew writing a book would help with that. That if you did have a company, Tommy, with 100 sales professionals and you saw that I was a published author, you would probably make the inference that I knew something of value to be able to share with your team. So being able to reach out to someone and use a book as kind of a glorified business card, hey, Tommy, it's nice to meet you. I know you have some sales professionals. I'd like to give you a copy of my book. And then you start diving into that. And then next thing you know, you call me up and say, hey, I like the stuff you shared in your book. Can you come share that in person with our team? And the book has absolutely been, outside of word of mouth, the number one lead generator for speaking engagement. So for all of those reasons, I decided to write a book very early in my corporate speaking career.
I keep hearing over and over is you have the vision to see ahead before it gets to you. And seems like you've been that way ever since, leaving college. You've always had the forefront to see things ahead before they got there and to help continue to grow your career, which a lot of people can't do. So listeners out there, take this to heart, because this is golden nuggets you don't get all the time. AlanSteinJr.com is where you can probably order the book. I'm sure you can. And anywhere else they can get the book?
You can go to raiseyourgamebook.com. There's a ton of stuff on there. And certainly you can get it directly from Amazon, or if you do prefer listening, like they do for the podcast, they can go to audible.com. I actually did the read for the book, which was a fun experience as well. And I'm also at Alan Stein Jr. on the major social channels. So certainly if anyone has any questions or needs anything from me, I love engaging with people on social. Just drop me a quick line there as well.
And I'll link all those in the show notes for people so they can get to AlanSteinJr.com, to the link to Raise Your Book or Raise Your Game for the book, and on LinkedIn, and we'll get you guys all hooked up with Alan if you guys want to reach out. But a couple more questions before I let you go. And one of them, sure, I really like, and I've heard you speak about this before, is what we know versus what we do. I'm going to let you take it because you can explain a lot better than me, but I gravitated to it when I heard it. I listened to it a couple times. I've kind of, have dug in a little bit more deeper with some research. But if you would explain to our listeners exactly what you're talking about of what we know versus what we do.
Yeah, I've coined that a performance gap. And it's the gap, as you just said perfectly, the gap between what we know we're supposed to do and what we actually do. And every human being on the planet has a series of performance gaps. But the highest performers in the world have found ways to eliminate or mitigate those gaps, especially in the most pressing areas. What I always use as an example, anyone listening to this right now, I'm willing to bet if I ask you to write down a list of the healthiest foods that you know of, you could come up with a pretty good list. And if I asked you how many hours of sleep you're supposed to get every night, most of your listeners would shout out a number in a split second. And if I ask your listeners, just kind of etch out what you should do from a physical activity standpoint each week. You don't have to design a workout like an NBA strength coach, but what are some things you should do? I think most of them would be able to etch that out and say, hey, do 30 to 40 minutes of something physically active most days of the week. Examples being going for a walk or jogging or bike riding or swimming and doing some push-ups and lunges and sit-ups. Like, people know those things, yet statistically, most people don't do those things. Most people do not eat healthy food consistently. Most people do not get adequate sleep. And statistics show clearly that most people choose not to be physically active as often as they know they should. So then it leads the question, well, why would otherwise very intelligent people not do the things that they know that they're supposed to do? And the short answer to that is because they're not easy. Just because something is basic, and I do think those things are basic in premise, it doesn't mean that they're actually easy to do. Jim Rohn, one of the first motivational speakers, said something to the effect of, things that are easy to do are also very easy not to do. And that's a very, fine line between the two. So, it's easy to not eat healthy food. it's easy to stay up late and not get good sleep. And it's definitely easy not to go to the gym. But you know that you're supposed to do those things. So a good key to performance is giving folks tools and strategies to close that gap and start doing the things we know. And I just use health and fitness as an example. I mean, you could use finances. Most people know that you shouldn't ring up tremendous amounts of debt, like credit card debt. Most people know you should be putting money away for retirement or for the future. Most people know those things. But once again, you start Googling the statistics, most people aren't doing them. And the list goes on. You could do the same thing for relationships. You could do the same thing for any area of your health and well-being. So if you can learn to close those gaps and do those things, and I'll even say that, for the most part, and I've certainly enjoyed chatting with you, and you've asked some wonderful questions, but I doubt very highly that folks don't know all of the stuff that I've just shared. Maybe I'm sharing it in a different way, or might be saying it with different terminology. But some of these traits that we're talking about, people already know to do these things, but they're not doing them. And that's why it's helpful for us to have a conversation like this where we can remind them.
This is golden nuggets, people. If you don't think these are golden nuggets, rewind this podcast and start it over, because you need to understand. Last thing, Alan, for you is, and as we're recording this, we're in the middle of the coronavirus and things may or may not start opening up, but what's on the future for you? What's on your outlook?
So as a speaker, I mean, this is the longest I've gone in the last 4 years without speaking, without actually getting on an airplane. I mean, I think it's been 6 weeks now since I've had an opportunity to be on stage. And, my guess is it could be another several months before I'm on stage again. Even if the world starts to open up and non-essential businesses can start going back, I think the conference industry and before we have mass gatherings, even in a mecca like Vegas, are going to take a little while. So that's been challenging only because it makes me realize how much I love what I do. I really miss being on stage and being in front of people. And to me, that's a good sign. The fact that I miss it this much shows me that at present I'm in the right place. This is what I should be doing because I do miss it this much. And it also helped clarify the fact that speaking is just what I do. It's not who I am. At my core, I consider myself a coach. I consider myself someone that fills other people's buckets. I consider myself someone that helps people improve their performance so that they feel better about themselves. So even though I can't be on stage doing that, I can still do that in other ways. And this podcast and this conversation is a perfect example. You better believe that having this chat with you fills my bucket just as much as I hope that it fills yours and it fills your listeners. That I get off a call like this and I'm so full and I'm so energized and I'm so excited because this is what lights me up. And it's been an adjustment doing it virtually, to be looking into a camera and talking to one person as opposed to being on stage looking at thousands. But it's an adjustment that I've had to make, and I'm able to work on some different skill sets because my goal is to make sure that when the COVID-19 is over, that I am a better version of myself in every area of my life. I want to be a better speaker. I want to be a better father. I want to be more physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. Like I want to come out of this better than I was when I went in. And I actually like that challenge.
I love that challenge. It's something I think I'm going to start diving a little bit more deeper than I already have into. Alan, are you a golfer?
I'm not. I've played golf twice in my life, and as you can probably guess, they weren't pretty. It wasn't pretty either time.
Well, next time you come out to Vegas, once everything's reopened, out at Lake Las Vegas, there's Reflection Bay Golf Club. It's located in the heart of beautiful Lake Las Vegas. Listeners, you can go to reflectionbaygolf.com. That's reflectionbaygolf.com. It's one of the top 100 courses the public can play. It's a Jack Nicklaus signature design that played host to the Wendy's 3-Tour Challenge from 1998 to 2007. And it's okay that you're not a golfer. When you come in town, we'll get you, we'll hook up together. I'll take you out there for lunch and take you to sites. It's a beautiful place to see for sure.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you and with your listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. Everybody, if you have some time, as I said in the opener, please go to Apple Podcasts, and you can find us anywhere podcasts are available. If you could kindly give us 5 stars and some kind remarks, I would appreciate it. It helps me grow the show. For show notes, links to everything, how to get a hold of Alan Stein Jr. at alansteinjr.com. Go to our website, beforethelightspod.com, and follow us on Instagram at beforethelightspod. Thank you for listening to Before the Lights. This is Tommy Canale. We will talk to you next time. Until then, everybody, stay safe, keep smiling, and take care.